Morning.
Morning.
Thank you. To any of our visitors and guests, welcome to Immaculate Heart of Mary. I am Father Tom Miller, the pastor. Deacon Chris and I are delighted to have you pray with us, all of our parishioners. Always good to pray with you. It's the third Sunday, year of study. Anybody remember the two things that it takes for us to be men and women of study? Desire and discipline. We'll get back to that at the end of the homily. Desire and discipline. You and I will never study anything in our life if we do not have desire and discipline. Because if we don't have desire, we're not even going to bother with it. And if we don't have discipline, we're not going to stick with it. So it takes those two things, especially in faith. Good news, bad news, great news. But let's start with good news. Have you seen any people doing this lately? And they'll be moving around. Now, do you know what they're doing if they got their phone out? Mary? Oh, thank you, Ann. They're playing a game that is called an augmented reality. This is a dead phone, by the way. This one isn't live. This one's dead. It's been retired. It's a paperweight now. That's about it. They're playing Pokemon Go, which is called an augmented reality game. Now, isn't that an interesting title for a descriptor for a game? An augmented reality. So if this thing was working and was on, and I was playing the game, I would see all of you through the camera, and then superimposed by the game would be the little creatures, the Pokemon, out there among you somewhere. That's kind of a cool thing. Now, I don't play the game. I got nothing that I spend time on. I'm not interested in this, but I understand the appeal of it. And it's not new. Pokemon have been around for 20 years. Came out in 1996 as a card game. And it was a card game where two people would build their decks, have their creatures, and have duels between the two trainers, as it were. That's really the essence of the game. So in the handheld game, you play a trainer, and you actually go to various spots outside, not just in a building, to find various Pokemon that have been designated to a GPS coordinate with a particular tag on it. So over at the water tower, maybe you'd find a water one. I hear now it's a training facility. Somehow I guess that changed. But it's interesting because it's technology. I'm going to set the phone down. We'll grab it back in a second. And video games are fun. I'll be the first to tell you, I like video games. And a game like that gives us a sense of excitement. They're all visually appealing. If you've never seen a Pokemon, you ought to look at one. They're cute little creatures. It's hard not to like something called a Jigglypuff, or a Pikachu, or a Snorlax, or a Squirtle. I mean, I know some of the names because the neighbor kids 20 years ago played Pokemon. Now, I even played a few games with them. It's a neat concept for a card game. Of course, you spend a lot of money trying to build your deck. That's the rub. This game currently is free. You play your trainer, you get your creatures, all kinds of free things out there for you to find. You have a sense of gratification. You're developing your trainer, your creatures. Technology is neat. It's amazing. That's good news. We like technology. Bad news. The bad news of technology is few things have become more intrusive in our lives and more isolating than this. But it didn't start with this. That tendency has been there in our hearts all along. If you ever remember the old sitcoms where the father was at the table reading the newspaper and it was like a wall and everybody else was around the table and he, or usually the father's, reading the newspaper and the rest of the family's just there at the table. Same reality. So if you're with people and doing something else, it's really no different than being on the phone. The phone is just so immediate and so gratifying that it's much more intrusive than a newspaper. Because we can do all kinds, it's our pocket computer. Check our email, check our text messages. It makes a noise, I pick it up. It does something, I look to see if there's an update on Facebook, or did I get a new text message or something on Twitter. And it becomes a very intrusive reality. Now, I'm not going to get rid of my phone, but we have to look at its impact in our life. 20 years ago, at the very same time Pokemon was coming out as a card game, the number one complaint I would hear when I would listen to people in counseling sessions were that their husband or wife, their son or daughter were on AOL spending 5 hours in a chat room talking about who knows what. And for the most part, superficial conversation. They weren't divulging anything great or personal in the chat room. They were just enthralled by the idea that I can be sitting in Florissant talking to somebody living in Alaska. But the reality is, they're spending that time not with family members or friends or whatever. Just them and these people they may never ever meet online. And chat rooms are passé. Who does those anymore? But we've got Facebook, we've got Twitter, Google+, Snapchat, all kinds of different ways to connect with people we may know or may never meet. And the real danger of technology like that, this is the real bad news, is that we find it easier to talk oftentimes to people we don't have to be face-to-face with. Because we don't have to deal with their reactions, we don't have to deal with their disagreements, we don't have to clarify things. Anytime we don't like the conversation, we can shut it off. And that's a dangerous habit for you and I to get into, because we don't want to do that with people that we love, that are sitting across the table from us, that share our house. And the temptation is we take that behavior from technology, not just the phone, the computer is the same way, and it begins to unknowingly infiltrate our habits in living. And it erodes relationships, because we find it easier to do a text message that I can ignore than to be in a conversation with Bob, and then he says, well, what do you mean by that? And then I've got to spend 10 minutes or 15 minutes or maybe half an hour clarifying it to Bob, and it's now a mess, rather than if I just ignored it, he don't know what's going on. And that's bad news. Thanks, Bob. That's bad news, because what happens out on the roads with road rage can happen because of technology in our own personal lives, where we stop recognizing that there are people out there. I mean, that's what they say is the number one cause of road rage, is we fail to recognize other drivers as persons like ourselves. They are people interfering in my plans to get to point B, and that's what we get angry about. We don't think about it as somebody else going to their point B or wherever they're going. They're just careless, impatient, rude, rash drivers. And we get angry. There's more anger now out in the roads than there's ever been before. And it creeps into our hearts. And technology has a way to bring it into our homes and our dinner tables. And we don't want that. And we want to be aware, because that is horrific news. Because once you stop caring about your neighbors, you lose patience, you lose compassion, and the bad things happen to them, or you're tempted to do bad things to them, it's a lot easier. And that is very frightening news. And I'm not maligning technology, just its excessive intrusion into life and into our habits, into our thoughts, often without even thinking about it. Because we've all been out to eat, where we see 4 people at a table with 4 phones in their hands. It's not really personal. They are sharing space together, but they're not sharing a meal. All they are doing, and I've been guilty of that. I've been at the table and pulled out the phone. I hear it ring. Who doesn't feel the compulsion to grab this thing when it makes a noise? It could be important. It could be an emergency. It's me. And I pick it up and, oh, it's Walter, and he wants to know what size my shoes are. You know, who cares? You know, but we don't think that when we hear the noises and we pick it up. So that's all bad news. Now there's great news. The great news is, one, we can become aware of that and begin to free ourselves and put technology in its proper place. It's hard. It will be very hard, because it appeals to many of our weaknesses. I mean, that's why we like video games. Video games are immediate. I hit the button so many times and I get the thing. That's really all a video game ever is. I hate to say it's that simple, but that's what every video game is. I press the buttons, whatever the thing is does its thing, I achieve a new level, I'm better. Every game is that way, or going somewhere and whatever it is. If you ever want to see an interesting thing, go on YouTube and look for B.F. Skinner and pigeon test, and then you realize we feel like pigeons pecking away at our button to get our treat. That's what a lot of video games are like. And they're almost designed on that model, to keep us going, to keep us coming back. And it's not just video games, it's technology as a whole has learned that that's effective. So we want to be aware. That's our first great news. We can be aware and we can be free. We can put it back in its right place. Even greater news is that you and I are here this morning doing something that many people have already signed off on. They find worship to be meaningless in their life or of little value. So it's not worth the time. A Sunday morning is a good day to sleep in or maybe be out in the field going after your next Pokemon. Who knows? But you and I are here because we believe this is worthwhile. And I hope you believe that not only is this worthwhile, this is essential to our living today and our living forever. And we want to focus on that here we're coming to meet Jesus Christ. I mean, that's the secret of Mary. Usually when I hear this gospel, I spend a lot of time preaching about Martha because I'm a Martha. Many of us are Marthas. We're more comfortable doing things, getting things done, having things accomplished. And we can understand Martha's irritation. Mary is sitting on her keister doing nothing. Get her up. Mary knows more than Martha. Mary knows that there's something different about Jesus, that he is worth sitting and listening to and coming to know. And so she sits there attentive to his every word. Because even an ordinary conversation with Jesus has the potential to be extraordinary and surprising. Mary has discovered that. Martha will too. At this time she's still kind of grinding her teeth. That she's doing hospitality, which is a good thing. That's an act of Jewish charity, hospitality. Welcome your guests, serve them, wait on them, make them the center. And Jesus said, well, there's a better way to make me the center of your life, and that's to listen to me. And we want to look at Mary, sister of Martha and Lazarus, as a model for that. That we want to begin pulling away from our computer, our little handheld TV, or whatever it is, to interact with one another. It will be messy at times. It's okay, it's worth it. It is always worth it to work through any type of issues of understanding with people we love. Because it deepens those bonds. It strengthens those bonds. It may not be easy, and that's what's frustrating. Because if you get frustrated at the game or technology, push the button, turn it off. You walk away from it. You can't do that so easily with a live person. You've got to deal with the fact that you may be snuggling up next to them in bed that night, and they don't want to talk to you. And that's not easy. I mean, I don't have to worry about the dog, so I'm lucky. But, and that's hard. And that takes a lot of coming out of yourself and humility to begin to work through that. And that's why we need Jesus Christ. That's why we need him to show us how to live and love and respect one another. It's Jesus who shows us how to live in patience. 30 years of obscurity that we know nothing about except for one instance in the temple at the age of 12. Till he finally gets the nudge from his father to proclaim the kingdom. We're not built for that type of patience anymore, but we can be. We can be rebuilt for that type of patience through prayer, through desire and discipline. That's where that comes in. Look at the story of Abraham. Abraham is 90 years old when God says, I'm going to make you a father. Now, Abraham's bucket list is really short at 90. Dying is really the last thing on his list. And God says, no. You're going to be a father and have a son, and I'm going to make a great nation of your descendants. I mean, that's a radical change in the proverbial bucket list for Abraham. It doesn't happen immediately. God does it at 90. Sarah doesn't have Isaac till 20 years later. Can you imagine waiting 20 years later when you're 90 years old? And probably your daily prayer to God is, Lord, I'm not getting any younger. He probably said that every day. Just in case you don't know, Lord, I'm not getting any younger. And he's surprised because of his patience. 3 men come to visit him in his tent. He recognizes that one of them is the Lord, and he rolls out the hospitality. And in that act of hospitality and surprise, God confirms that by next year, you will be a father. Not Ishmael, who was the shortcut. Ishmael was Sarah and Abraham's attempt to help God out, since maybe God doesn't know what he's doing. God doesn't need our help. And a year later, Isaac is born. And you and I come here week after week to have our eyes opened to the surprise that God has waiting for us. That, we talk about augmented reality. If you and I really put on Christ, as St. Paul says, we have an augmented reality in the way we look at things. Our life, our faith, its meaning. And I pray today that you pray for me, and I pray for you to do that, to really put on Christ. And then to go out in the world and to live it. And to celebrate this great news that day after day, week after week, Jesus Christ comes to us. And when you go home, look up B.F. Skinner pigeons, and you'll be surprised.